What's your vision of life in 10 years, in 5 years, in 20 years, in 30 years? If you can do the visualization, it can be really helpful. I did this practice the other day and I thought, oh, 10 years, very easy. I'm 39 years old. I'll be 49. Okay, great. And then it slapped me in the face that my 7-year-old is going to be a 17-year-old. My 5-year-old is going to be a 15-year-old. And my 3-year-old is going to be a 13-year-old. That's a real different picture than having $5 million in your investment accounts in 10 years. That's a completely different conversation. Who are you going to be? I won't probably change all that much over the next 10 years. I'll probably look a little older. I'll probably be a little wiser. But over the next 10 years of my children's life, talk about a transformation, talk about a growth, talk about a phase of life. And if you're not focused on those things, then those numbers don't really matter. So with that, let me break down what meaningful prosperity really is. So really, this is where we start with the why, understanding your why. And we talk about this with our clients all the time. Really, what's the drive behind this? Why do you want, $10 million? Why do you want $5 million? Why do you want a $500,000 paying job? If we understand the why, then we can start building other pieces to the puzzle. We start to look at your vision, your values, and your mission. So with this intentional and internal framework, it's actually more reflective. It's a deeper approach. And it's a lot of times the spot where people jump over. They go past. They don't want that woo-woo stuff, right? They want me to show them the biggest, best portfolio that has the sexiest returns, that's different than their buddy that's doing it at work. They just want it to be new, cool, and different. And the reality is that that's all great, but there's no such thing as free lunch. And in order to achieve some of those things, you need to understand that ultimately you've got to take some steps to understand the why behind that. So this is where we get into the vision. This is, where are you going? Where are we going? What's the direction? And I talk about this with our mapping system that we talk about through our financial planning processes. If we're going to the backcountry to go hiking, we probably ought to have a destination. As I've talked about a lot in the past, I'm a backcountry skier. And if you're with your friends and you guys don't know where you're going, then the likelihood of getting caught in an avalanche is actually highly likely. So having a destination in mind and then doing the route finding. How do you get from A to B? You've got to go through these different spots. So knowing where you're going, what's the destination? What's the steps that you're going to be following? That's really important to really understand, what's happening along the way. So what does life look like? What's your vision of life in 10 years, in 5 years, in 20 years, in 30 years? So what do all these different periods kind of look like? And if you can do the process, if you can do the visualization, it can be really helpful. Now, we can incorporate spreadsheets, we can incorporate some of the planning into being create visuals. So financially, what does it look like? And then you start to think about it. I did this practice the other day, and I was looking at some spreadsheets and I was looking at some projections. And I thought, oh, 10 years, very easy. I'm 39 years old. I'll be 49. Okay, great. And then it slapped me in the face that my 7-year-old is going to be a 17-year-old. My 5-year-old is going to be a 15-year-old. And my 3-year-old is going to be a 13-year-old. That's a real different picture than having $5 million in your investment accounts in 10 years. That's a completely different conversation. Who are you going to be? I won't probably change all that much over the next 10 years. I'll probably look a little older. I'll probably be a little wiser. But over the next 10 years of my children's life, talk about a transformation, talk about a growth, talk about a phase of life. And if you're not focused on those things, then those numbers don't really matter. So when we have these conversations, we have to think about that in context. What does this really mean? Because it can mean one thing here and a completely different thing over here. So we have to understand also the tension between desires and what's practical. Well, guess what? I would love to have a house at Steamboat, a house on the beach, a house here, all of these things. Well, that's great, Taylor. I really would like that. But we have to then think about what's practical. What's practical is, what's the cost of that? How often are you going to use them? What does that look like for you and your family financially? Are you going to then be slave to those things? Do you have the income to keep those up? Do you have the cash flows? Do you have all these things? We start to get actually what's practical. So we can start going big, but then bring it back to, and that's not, operating in a scarcity mindset. It's just saying, hey, what's the reality? Do we maybe rent the dream instead of buy the dream? That's possible. I've had a number of clients that thought that they were going to retire on a yacht in the Bahamas, only to turn out that one of the spouses didn't really like sailing. They didn't really like being on the water. So guess what? They pivoted and they ended up buying one of those Dodge Sprinters or the Mercedes Sprinter vans and traveling the US and going to amazing spots in the United States, in Mexico and Canada. And they've done that. Instead of having a boat that sails, they have a camper that drives. And so I think that that's a really cool experience as well. So understanding that vision of what that looks like. Then we get into the values conversation. So what matters most? And this is something that I think a lot of people have struggled with. In fact, Mark Manson has a wonderful podcast called Solved. And one of them is about our values, going and understanding, what are our values? Do they change over time? And the answer is yes. And also that we are ever evolving creatures. And something that was of value to us back then may not be of value to us now. And something that's valuable to us now may be something that changes in the future. Maybe it's less important. So understanding those values will really help us understand what it means and what the driver is behind this meaningful prosperity. So what I look at is, when we think about our values, it's helping us make better decisions. So as an example, as I talked about, when we're building wealth, we think about how you're spending money. That's a great place to understand your values. If you can look at your cash flows and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to send my kids to college, without any, let's just say this is a good example. You're going to send your kids to college without any student debt because that was something that was really challenging. That's a value. You want to provide for your family, and you're not putting any money away for their college specifically. Well, guess what? They're going to be of college age pretty quick here. If they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, it's going to happen real quick. And all of a sudden you're going to be sitting there and you're not going to have the funds that you had hoped. So now you've got to rob Peter to pay Paul. Maybe you take on the debt. Maybe you don't fulfill the obligation or fulfill that value that you had hoped. Now you're in conflict with that value of providing for your family. And so that's certainly a case that I've seen. It also helps, if you go through some of the stories or moments that matter a lot to you, because I bet inside of those stories, there's going to be values. You might be having a hard time landing that, but we have a system that we can identify some of those top 3, 5 values, and then we can start creating a decision tree around that. So do you want the sexy stock portfolio, but you're also at the same time a conservative investor? Well, that's actually in direct conflict with your values. So there's going to be some dissonance there, and that could create some problems when it comes to investment expectations, return expectations, the direction of the portfolio. So that's certainly a big area. The last part of meaningful prosperity is going to be the mission that you're on. What are you here to do? Now, gosh, we're not all Mother Teresa. I get it. We're all along in this journey. We're trying to survive. We're trying to raise children. We're trying to be a good spouse. We're trying to be a good, business person. There's a lot of things that we're trying to do. But on our mission, there's something on our heart that we are meant to do in this life. And this gets a little bit spiritual. It gets a little bit touchy-feely. It can be a little woo-woo. But in the end, we have to understand who you are. And if you can identify what you want to have as your legacy, what you want to have as your contribution to society or just your family, is this providing service? What kind of deeper level of meaning do you want to have when you expire? And I can guarantee that at your deathbed, you're not going to say, I wish I had spent more time in the office. You can almost guarantee that. Man, if I had only spent 65 hours instead of 60, I would have been so much more fulfilled. I can almost guarantee that's not going to be the case. So some examples that I've seen clients use is that they want to give back to their church. They want to make sure that the thing that really catapulted them in their spirituality, in their direction in life, they are then going to serve back. And they want to give back. And that's a lot of times with church contributions. It could be building a family office style where you're doing some family leadership, where you know that the wealth that you're going to be building is actually going to be generational. That's going to pass on to the next generation. So how do they become good stewards of that wealth? How do they use that as a catapult or a trampoline to success financially for them, but with the lessons that you've integrated and instilled in that family unit? That's certainly another one. Another thing that I've seen a lot of families do is build businesses that are then going to be passed on to the next generation. That's a great way to create legacy. So when your wealth is aligned with your mission, everything else becomes much clearer. So it's easier to say no to the frivolous things, the things that are creating noise in your life. When you have a clear mission and you know this is your path, then you can kind of put those blinders on a little bit. Obviously, you need inputs, you need some course corrections at times. But if you have a clear mission to serve, to provide, to create meaning or create legacy, then all of a sudden some of those other things become less important. Now let's shift gears to the second portion of this mindful wealth equation, and that is financial vitality. So financial vitality is really giving the vision the teeth. So if we think about the meaningful prosperity is kind of the overarching kind of themes, the things that are driving us, the touchy-feely stuff. We look at financial vitality, kind of the blocking and tackling. This is going to be some of the strategy that you implement. But tying these two things together is going to be very important. So the first part of this financial vitality is creating awareness around your financials and around your personal life, because those two things are going to be intertwined, right? We know that money is emotional. And if money is emotional, then we better have our emotional side figured out to a certain degree. And if we can create some awareness around that, then ultimately we can have some awareness around the dollars and cents, as well as the emotional side of who we are. So having awareness, knowing your current state, can be very, very important to providing direction in what we ultimately want to do. So what I look at here is this understanding of differentiating facts versus stories. And I do this through my fact finding conversations with a lot of clients. They will say, for example, I'll ask, do you have a 401k? Yes. How much is it? It's $50,000, but it could be a lot more. But then I had to cut how much I was contributing. I know I should be contributing 10%, but I'm only contributing 6%, and it could be more. And then I didn't do the investment strategy. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. All I asked was how much was in that account. They then generated all these stories around why it should be more or why it could be better. And the reality is it doesn't matter. It just is. That is a fact. That is something that is happening right now. And guess what? We can then course correct. We can make changes to. We can talk about what that future looks like. But if we have stories so wound up into who we are and what our financial situation is, it's very hard to create awareness around it, because then there's the shoulda, coulda, wouldas that are very detrimental to our overall success or failure to our financial lives. And if we don't create that awareness, then we're kind of stuck on first base. So I just met with somebody recently, and she's kind of struggling through her financial life. And she had all these stories. She wanted to compare herself to her brother. She wanted to say that, she was in one breath, she was saying that she's doing better than this guy and worse than that guy. And it was like, oh my gosh, well, let's just pump the brakes, because let's focus on you. And if we have this experience, if we can create an awareness around where we are right now, where our feet are, where our butt sits, then we can start a direction. We can start a dialogue to either move in a different direction or continue some of the same things. Now, the next part of this is going to be strength. Let's build on what's working. This is something that I think a lot of people don't put a lot of effort into. They don't want to give themselves a lot of credit. They might see a bank account and say, oh, that's good or that's bad. They'll just provide some sort of a number to it, or they'll provide some sort of an interpretation of it. But in the end, it's actually not that helpful. But what we want to do, and I think this is always helpful to have a third party or somebody like myself come in and say, these are some of the strengths. And we do this through our financial planning process. We identify whether your income or your cash flow is a good thing or a bad thing. So when we think about this, we look at some of those habits that are working. Okay, are you a saver? Well, great, that's awesome. Are you an investor? Do you like to take a little bit of risk? That can be awesome. So we identify these different strengths, because I think if we can identify some strengths, it can give us some confidence. And I go back to this confidence competence loop, where a lot of times people don't have any confidence around money because they've never been taught these things. And so if they can find some confidence, they're like, oh, I had no idea that I was in a good spot, or I had no idea that my credit score was X. I'm like, oh yeah, well, that's good to know. Like, it's not, going to be the end all be all, but it certainly could be helpful. That is a huge piece that can help build the next phase. Especially it can help identify the things that you're doing over here that are good, to then help with the things that maybe are not as strong, some of the weaknesses. Then from there, we create alignment. So this goes back to creating decisions that are in alignment with our vision, mission, values, and it creates more integrity into the overall process. So what do I mean by this? We can talk through how emotional decisions can derail those plans. So if you want to pay off some debt, and yet you get really tied down with Prime Week and you just spend a bunch of money, and all that money that was earmarked for the debt payoff actually goes to Amazon, well, maybe that's out of alignment with your goals or approach. Or if you want to have $1 million net worth and you're not saving any money, as much as you'd like, that's certainly an opportunity. Or one of the things that I always laugh about is I had a client who was new to Denver, and we were going through this values thing, and we were talking about it, and he was laughing with me. He said, I did a piece in my former town. He was highlighted in one of the business newspapers, and they asked, what do you like to do outside of work? And he said that he likes to mountain bike, hike, and ski. And then it got published. And when he read it, he goes, oh my gosh, that is such a lie, because he hadn't done any of those 3 things in 3 years. In his head, he liked to do those. In his head, that's what he did, but he didn't actually do it. And then he pulled up the stakes and moved to Colorado, because it enabled him to be in alignment with his values, with the things that bring him, more fulfillment, more meaning, more levity in life. And I think that having alignment with our financial decisions that are tied to those visions, that mission, those values, can be so helpful, because it can create such a much clearer way and a path forward. And then finally, we talked about this last bit, which is something that I think a lot of people don't think much about it, and that's called endurance. So we build a plan that lasts, having curveballs thrown at you, job loss, market volatility, health issues. These things are they're invariably going to happen. We know that. We don't know when they're going to happen, but we know that certain things are going to happen along the way. It's not a smooth trajectory. As much as the models want to make it look smooth, we know that we're not going to get 8%, 9% every year returns. We're going to have a year where it's down 20%. We're going to have a year that's up 30%. We're going to have some years that are under, languishing, but they're not going to look as good. But we have to understand that that's just a part of the journey, that we can't get tied up with 1 year over the next or 1 week over the next. And if you have a job loss, what does that mean? So if we know that these surprises, these curveballs happen, we can kind of understand how we can build around it. So building this idea around endurance, this plan that lasts, can allow us to fight through some of those obstacles. And when I think about endurance, when it comes to the financial conversation around mindful wealth, we tie flexibility and resilience, or proactive resilience. So this is that constant update. What are we doing? What's your relationship with your advisor? So I work with our clients. We're constantly having these conversations. We're talking, at least quarterly, maybe more often, to make sure that we're up to speed. Has there been a recent health issue? Has there been a recent issue around your job situation? I was working with a client not too long ago. We'd done all this financial planning. Everything looked awesome. And then there was a cancer diagnosis. And that was really scary. But guess what? We knew that they could be financially taken care of, because there were certain things in place, disability in place, enough cash on the sidelines to make sure that there was some bumps in the road. And in the end, they're through that, thank goodness. But we didn't have to blow up the portfolio. We didn't freak out. We didn't have to have a fire sale of these investments just to cover something that was unknown. we could at least go back to it and say, okay, well, what are the opportunities? And while it was a very emotional experience, what we could do is we didn't have to think about our money emotionally. We can look at it from a different perspective. So this idea around endurance is that money that's going to last, plans that are going to last, they're going to go through the ups and downs. And this is also the idea that you can then create that legacy, things that are going to pass on to the next generation. So with this, these are kind of the core concepts around meaningful prosperity and financial vitality. Those two things combined create mindful wealth. And for me, this is a big part of the job and the work that we do at 4 Points Wealth. It's something that is very important. We're seeing it at the highest level that we're having these conversations when we hear a Scotty Scheffler speak about it to an audience of millions, if not billions. We're hearing it from people that are burned out in the job place. We see it on LinkedIn pretty often. We see it in my practice where people are done with corporate world. They want to go do the entrepreneurial path. They want to create and take time back, and they want to take their ownership. And I think with mindful wealth, we can start having this dialogue at a greater level that can help us provide deeper meaning, deeper purpose behind the hustle, the grind, the growth of our financial lives. And it really comes back to, our complex world that we live in. We have all these irons in the fire. You've got a business, you've got multiple homes, you've got children, you've got a spouse, you've got all these things that are happening in your life. How do you create any sort of context? How do you create any sort of vision, clarity around what you're doing if we're not going a little bit deeper than just the dollars and cents, the basics, right? If we're just doing the basic cash flows and we're just looking at all the numbers and we're not going a little bit deeper, then we've only skimmed the surface. And my call to the people that are interested in this is to look at what life is at a deeper level, to go beyond just the dollars and cents. Let's think about the visions, the mission, the values that create who you are and what you're all about. So legacy is not just about what you leave, but about how you live. Because guess what? The impact on the people that are closest to you are going to be felt. And that's the story that you want to have people tell at your funeral. It's not that he left behind $10 million. It's that he was a good person, that he cared for us, that he took the shirt off his back and gave it to us when we were in need. It's those types of experiences that provide deeper meaning, deeper connection, and ultimately more wealth in the world that you're creating. And I am deeply passionate about this process. And I think that it's something that we integrate at 4 Points Wealth really well because we have steps, we have processes, we have context around what this means. So when you get to the Scotty Scheffler moment of what's the point, then this might be a perfect opportunity to connect with 4 Points Wealth and understand what we are all about, what our process is. When you are going through life and you kind of feel like your financial life is not aligned with your values, then maybe it's time to take a second look at what you're doing. If you don't feel aligned, inspired, and building with intention, then it's time to make some changes. And at 4 Points Wealth, we take the steps to help you understand where you are, where you're going, and where you want to be, both from a financial level as well as a more internal, deeper level that gives you deeper meaning, deeper level of satisfaction, and deeper connection.